All right, so let's dive into some pretty big changes happening down in Florida,
Yeah.
specifically around immigration enforcement.
Right?
We're looking at a CBS Miami article from today, February 24th, 2025,
Okay.
titled "Florida Sheriffs Move Quickly on Immigration Enforcement."
Hmm.
And I guess they weren't kidding about quickly.
No.
Things seem to be moving at lightning speed.
Yeah, it's really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
All 67 Florida counties have already agreed to partner with federal immigration authorities
Wow.
to detain undocumented immigrants in their jails.
Hmm.
This is a direct result of SBTC, a brand new state law passed just this month.
So this means anyone undocumented picked up for any reason
Right.
could end up detained in a county jail,
Yeah.
potentially facing deportation.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the thought process behind this sudden push?
Well, the law was passed during a special legislative session focused solely on immigration enforcement.
Hmm.
So clearly it's a priority
Yeah.
for Florida lawmakers right now.
Makes sense.
But the speed at which they're trying to implement this raises a lot of questions.
Yeah, I bet. For example, where are they going to put all these people?
Right.
Aren't jails already pretty crowded?
That's a major concern.
Yeah.
That several Florida sheriffs have already brought up.
Okay.
Federal immigration authorities only have about 2,000 beds in the entire state,
Wow.
and they're already at capacity.
That's not a lot, considering the size of Florida
Right.
and the number of undocumented immigrants potentially impacted by this law.
Exactly. Sheriff Grady Judd from Polk County put it pretty bluntly.
Okay.
He said that there's simply not enough room in county jails
Mm-hmm.
to handle the influx of detainees that this law could create.
Wow.
He even warned that they will overwhelm this system very rapidly.
That's a pretty dire prediction.
Yeah.
What are sheriffs doing to try and address this potential crisis?
They're currently working on an inventory of available beds in county jails.
Hmm.
But even with that, it seems likely that this lack of capacity could lead to some tough choices.
Like what?
Well, it could mean releasing other inmates to make room,
Oh, wow.
or potentially even creating dangerous overcrowding situations in these facilities.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah,
Imagine the impact this could have on the entire criminal justice system in Florida.
absolutely. And that's just one potential consequence.
Right?
We haven't even touched on the potential economic impacts
Yeah.
of detaining and potentially deporting undocumented workers.
Okay, so we've got this new law and potential jail overcrowding.
Right,
But how exactly are they going to start enforcing this?
right.
It seemed like it would be a logistical nightmare.
That's where the warrant service officer program comes in.
Okay.
This program is essentially deputizing specially trained sheriff's deputies to process immigrational detainers.
So these deputies are basically acting as a branch of ICE.
In a way, yes.
Interesting.
They can hold undocumented immigrants in jail for up to 48 hours
Hmm.
based solely on a detainer request from ICE
Wow.
until ICE can come pick them up.
So even without being convicted of a crime,
Right.
someone could be detained for 2 days
Yeah,
based on suspicion of being undocumented.
that's right.
Wow.
And that raises some concerns about due process and the potential for abuse.
Definitely. What are the sheriffs saying about this program?
Well, Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gualtieri emphasized
Okay.
that this program is primarily focused on undocumented immigrants who pose a public safety
Okay.
or national security threat,
Okay.
or who have committed serious crimes or been deported before.
So the idea is to target those considered the most dangerous,
Exactly.
undocumented immigrants.
Sheriff Gualtieri specifically said
Okay.
their priority is apprehending and deporting criminally illegal public safety threats, national security threats, and those who have been previously deported.
Wow.
And then the most pressing need is to keep people from being released back into our community to commit more crimes.
But who decides who fits those categories?
Right.
It seems like there's a lot of room for interpretation and potential bias there.
That's a valid point.
Yeah.
And the ACLU of Florida has already raised concerns about this law being overly broad and vague,
Okay.
potentially leading to racial profiling.
Wow.
They argue that anyone who looks or sounds like an immigrant could be unfairly targeted,
Right.
regardless of their actual legal status.
And how have the sheriffs responded to those concerns?
Well, Sheriff Judd from Polk County didn't mince words.
Okay.
He dismissed those concerns, saying, "We're tired of hearing that crap. That's BS. Just follow what the federal government tells you to do."
So there seems to be a real clash here between those pushing for stricter enforcement
Yeah,
and those concerned about potential discrimination.
absolutely. And this tension isn't just about SB2C and the Warrant Service Officer Program.
Okay.
There's another new law, SB4C,
Oh,
that takes things even further.
what's that one about?
This one makes illegal entry into Florida a state crime with a mandatory 9-month jail sentence.
Wow, 9 months.
It's a major escalation of penalties for those crossing the border illegally.
That seems pretty harsh.
It definitely is, and
Yeah.
it highlights just how determined Florida lawmakers are
Yeah.
to crack down on illegal immigration.
So now we've got 2 new laws,
Right.
a whole new program involving local law enforcement,
Right.
and a lot of questions about capacity,
Yeah.
potential consequences,
Mm-hmm.
and the risk of racial profiling.
Yeah.
What else do we need to know to really understand this situation?
Well, SB4C also created a new State Board of Immigration Enforcement,
Okay.
and they've already had their first meeting and appointed an executive director, Larry Keefe.
So things are really moving fast on this.
Yeah.
Who is Larry Keefe?
Right.
And what does this board actually do?
Keefe is a former federal prosecutor
Okay.
with a background in public safety.
Hmm.
This board is essentially in charge of overseeing the implementation of these new laws
Okay.
and making sure everything runs smoothly.
Okay, so we've got this new board with a former prosecutor at the helm.
Right.
What could that mean for how these new laws are enforced?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Keith's background suggests a focus on law and order.
Okay.
We'll have to wait and see how that translates into specific enforcement strategies.
And how does this new board fit into the existing federal immigration system?
Yeah.
We've got ICE Border Patrol.
Yeah.
And now this state board.
Right.
It seems like a recipe for confusion and potential conflict.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity
Yeah.
to an already complicated system.
Well, sure.
And that brings us to a quote from Charlotte County Sheriff Bill Prummel,
Okay.
who also happens to be the president of the Florida Sheriff's Association.
What did he have to say?
He described immigration laws as very, very complex,
Hmm.
acknowledging the chaos at the federal level.
Okay.
It seems like even the people tasked with enforcing these new laws
Yeah.
are aware of the potential challenges.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very reassuring.
No.
So we've got state laws potentially clashing with federal laws.
Right.
A lack of capacity in the system.
Right.
And concerns about racial profiling.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What are the potential unintended consequences of these new laws?
Right.
What will the impact be on immigrant communities?
Hmm.
And what can people do if they're concerned about these changes?
Those are all great questions, and we'll dig into those a little deeper in just a minute.
Okay.
Stay with us.
You know, it's important to remember that this situation in Florida isn't happening in a vacuum.
Right.
This tension between state and federal authority on immigration is a nationwide issue.
So Florida is kind of like a testing ground for stricter immigration enforcement.
In a way, yes.
Hmm.
And that makes it even more crucial to understand the potential consequences.
Right.
Both intended and unintended.
Let's talk about those consequences then.
Okay.
We've already touched on the possibility of jails becoming overcrowded.
Right.
But what other impacts could these laws have?
Well, one major concern is the economic impact.
Okay.
Florida's economy relies heavily on industries like agriculture and tourism,
Right.
which employ a significant number of undocumented immigrants.
Right. Those industries often depend on immigrant labor.
Exactly.
What happens if those workers are suddenly detained or deported?
It could have a ripple effect throughout the state's economy.
Hmm.
Businesses could struggle to find workers, prices could increase,
Wow.
and economic growth could be stunted.
It seems like lawmakers might not have fully considered the economic consequences.
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
And then there's the human cost,
Right.
which is often overlooked in these policy debates.
What do you mean by human cost?
I'm talking about the potential for families to be separated,
Right.
for individuals to be detained for extended periods without due process,
Hmm.
and for fear and mistrust to grow within immigrant communities.
It's easy to get lost in the legal and logistical details,
Yeah,
but we can't forget that real people's lives are being impacted by these decisions.
absolutely. And it brings us back to the ACLU's concerns about racial profiling.
Right.
If law enforcement officers are given broad discretion to determine who might be an undocumented immigrant,
Hmm.
there's a real risk of bias and stereotypes coming into play.
So someone could be stopped and questioned or even detained simply because of their race or ethnicity.
That's the fear.
Wow.
And even if it doesn't happen intentionally, implicit bias can still lead to unfair treatment.
That's a scary thought. What would that kind of environment do to communities?
It could create a chilling effect,
Yeah.
making people afraid to interact with law enforcement
Right.
or even to leave their homes for fear of being targeted.
Wow.
This could erode trust in law enforcement
Yeah.
and make it harder for them to do their jobs effectively.
So this isn't just about immigration anymore.
Right.
It's about fundamental rights, and the relationship between communities and law enforcement.
Exactly.
This all seems incredibly complex,
Yeah.
with the potential for far-reaching consequences.
hmm
Is there any room for optimism here?
I think it's important to remember that these policies are still very new.
Okay.
There's always the possibility for adjustments and course corrections as the situation unfolds.
So it's not a done deal. There's still room for change.
Absolutely. Public awareness and engagement are crucial in shaping these policies.
Hmm.
If people are informed about the potential consequences, they can hold their elected officials accountable
Right.
and advocate for more humane and effective approaches.
What can people actually do to make their voices heard on this issue? It feels like such a big, complicated system.
There are several things people can do.
Okay.
They can contact their state legislators and express their concerns.
Okay.
They can support organizations working on immigration rights and legal aid. And they can educate themselves and others about the complexities of immigration law
Right.
and the human impact of these policies.
It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming challenges,
Yeah,
individual actions and collective efforts can make a difference.
exactly. Change rarely happens overnight,
Right.
but consistent pressure and advocacy can create momentum for positive change.
All of this information is a lot to digest.
Yeah,
Before we move on, I want to take a moment to address you directly, our listener.
okay,
What has stood out to you in this conversation?
right.
What questions or concerns has this discussion raised for you?
Yeah,
We've covered a lot of ground here.
uh-huh.
The rapid pace of policy changes, the capacity concerns, the economic impact, the potential for racial profiling, and the human cost of these new enforcement measures.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers,
Right.
but understanding the nuances and the different perspectives at play is the first step towards navigating this evolving landscape.
And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point.
Right.
We've sparked a conversation, but the real work happens when we take this knowledge and turn it into action.
Exactly. Don't let this information just sit there. Talk to your friends, family, and neighbors about it. Share what you've learned. Write to your elected officials.
Get involved with organizations working on immigration issues.
Yeah.
Find a way to make your voice heard, because even one voice can contribute to change. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, there's one thing that's been on my mind that we haven't discussed yet.
And what's that?
How might all of this impact upcoming elections, both here in Florida and at the national level?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Will immigration become a central issue in campaigns? How will candidates address this issue and the solutions they propose? These are things we need to pay close attention to.
It's a reminder that policies are shaped by the people we elect.
Right.
Our votes have consequences. We need to stay informed, stay engaged, and make our voices heard.
Well said. That's the core of what we do here on the Deep Dive.
Right.
We equip you with knowledge, spark your curiosity, and hopefully empower you to take action.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the complex world of immigration enforcement in Florida. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going. It's interesting to think about how Florida's approach to immigration enforcement might ripple outwards.
Right.
We've talked about the national debate,
Yeah.
but what about the global picture?
That's a perceptive observation.
Yeah.
Florida is a major gateway for people from all over the world, especially Latin America and the Caribbean.
Right.
These new laws could send a powerful message,
Okay.
impacting migration patterns
Yeah.
and even diplomatic relations.
It's like a butterfly effect, where a change in one state's policies could have unintended consequences on a global scale.
Right.
Thinking about that global scale, how might this impact Florida's economy in the long run?
That's where things get really complex. On the one hand, some argue that a tighter labor market could drive up wages for American workers. But on the other, if key industries can't find the workers they need,
Right.
it could lead to higher prices, labor shortages, and even economic decline.
It's almost like a gamble. Are they betting that the potential benefits outweigh the risks?
Exactly.
Wow.
And it's a gamble with a lot of people's lives hanging in the balance.
Yeah.
It'll be crucial to monitor the economic data over the coming months and years
Right.
to see how this plays out.
Right.
We'll want to pay close attention to any shifts in those industries that rely heavily on migrant labor.
Agriculture, hospitality, those are huge parts of Florida's economy.
Precisely. And then there's the question of how this will all play out legally.
Right.
Will these state laws be challenged in court? How will they interact with existing federal immigration laws?
Right. We haven't even gotten into the potential legal battles. Could this end up going all the way to the Supreme Court?
It's definitely a possibility.
Wow.
Remember, the ACLU has already signaled that they believe these laws are unconstitutional. This could turn into a protracted legal fight with implications for states' rights versus federal authority on immigration.
It feels like we're just at the beginning of a long and complicated story.
We are.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to stay informed,
Right.
to stay engaged,
Yeah,
and to keep asking these tough
for
questions.
sure.
This deep dive has provided you with a solid foundation,
Right.
but there's always more to learn.
So where can our listener go from here? What resources are available if they want to dig deeper into these issues?
There are several excellent organizations dedicated to immigration rights and legal advocacy in Florida.
Okay.
The Southern Poverty Law Center, the Florida Immigrant Coalition, and the American Immigration Lawyers Association are just a few.
And don't forget the power of local journalism.
Right.
Reputable news sources like the Miami Herald and the Tampa Bay Times will continue to cover these developments closely.
Absolutely. Staying informed is crucial to being an engaged citizen.
Yeah.
And as we've discussed, your voice matters.
Mm.
Contact your representatives, attend town hall meetings,
Right.
and make your perspective heard.
This is a story that's still being written,
Yeah.
and you, our listener, have a role to play in how it unfolds.
Well said. And that's the essence of the deep dive.
Right.
Empowering you with knowledge and encouraging you to become an active participant in the issues that shape our world.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the evolving landscape of immigration enforcement in Florida. Remember to keep learning, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.